Hello and welcome to Popular Antiquarian, the podcast about a middle-aged man exploring the strange and forgotten corners of pop culture. That man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is another episode in our ongoing deep dive into Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, the faintly baffling turn of the millennium action fantasy series set in pretend Ireland and turned out by Saban Entertainment, best known for the mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The last episode was the first of a two-parter focusing on the Knights' quest to tame the dragon Pyre. It didn't go so well. They got set on fire a bit. Queen Maeve's evil sentinels nicked their weapons, and they had to listen to the deranged babble of King Finvara of Tir na Nog, who offered them a series of incorrect facts about turtles in lieu of actual help. This time, just for a change, we open with a battle. It feels like every episode of Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog opens with a battle. It's honestly a wonder that there's anyone left of adult age in either the Kingdom of Kells or the Kingdom of Temra, considering how often these two go at it. One possibility is the people of Pretend Island breed like absolute rabbits, leading to a civilization which is perpetually on the edge of a Malthusian crisis that can only be relieved by the regular culling of large swathes of the population through acts of random violence. The other, and more likely scenario based on the actual footage, is that the people of Pretend Island are all so universally bad at fighting that they very rarely manage to actually injure each other. Certainly, this battle mostly seems to involve a lot of pushing and shoving, and very little of the screaming and bleeding to death traditionally associated with the contest of arms. The battle scenes vary a bit from episode to episode, and this one comes across as less dangerous than the mosh pit at a Cliff Richard gig. The forces of Kells turn out to be less good at gently shoving people than the forces of Temra, and a warrior is dispatched to King Conovar's castle to let him know that the northern border of Kells has fallen. We cut to the courtyard of Kells Castle, where King Conovar is recruiting various chieftains of Kells to fight alongside him. It's traditional under these circumstances to offer a stirring oration, but Conovar instead opts to say that he had expected to have the warrior Draganta alongside him by this point, but they don't. This is a passive-aggressive dig at the performance of the Mystic Knights, which wouldn't be out of place in any workplace break room in the land. I half expected him to follow up with a remark about how someone ate his sandwich that he left in the communal fridge even though it was clearly labelled, and why is he the only one who seems to buy milk even though he drinks his coffee black. At this point, a rider rocks up to reveal that Temra's assault on Kells has already started. That would be dire news indeed if Mystic Knights didn't treat battles the way most shows treat advertising breaks. It would be honestly more surprising if there wasn't a Temra assault on Kells by this point. It's a surprise attack in the same way that Wednesday is a surprise attack on the middle of the week. Following this less than rousing call to arms, we've got some time to fill thanks to this being a double episode. And if there's one thing I've learned to love in Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, it's the filler, which is reliably both undercooked and completely insane at the same time. In this instance, we're being treated to Kahad the Druid showing off his magical powers. A bit player is doing his very best pretending that a prop chest is much heavier than it actually is, while Ivar, Angus and Rohan look on. One quick swig of Kahad's potion and he's suddenly able to lift the chest above his head, the only issue being that it wears off almost immediately, causing the bit player to drop said chest. Naively, I thought that a potion that makes you strong for about 5 seconds was a cool bit of magic that one of the Mystic Knights would cleverly employ later in the episode. It will of course never be mentioned again. The secondary purpose of this scene is to give a chance for the Mystic Knights to tell each other things they already know. If there were trophies handed out for recalling important and noteworthy things that happened very recently, the Mystic Knights would have a cabinet full of extremely patronising silverware. Rohan says they've lost their weapons, and Ivar corrects him that the weapons were taken from them by the sentinels, which I think means he's technically winning who can remember things that happened recently competition. Deidre rocks up at this point, and it will surprise no one to learn that she's absolutely furious. She does her bit of memory work by angrily reminding everyone that they need to find the warrior Draganta. Ivar once again scores a bonus point in the competition by pointing out that they need to tame the dragon Pyre as well. No one has any idea how to do these things without their magical weapons, so it's down to Rohan to further kill the mood by suggesting a return trip to Tir na Nog to talk to King Finvara, the perpetually addled despot of a fairy realm where the only successful industry appears to be the manufacture of nitrous oxide. We haven't seen anything of the forces of darkness yet this episode, so it makes sense to check in on Queen Maeve and have someone explain the plot to her as well. She's feeling pretty upbeat, moving little soldiers round on a map of Kells as her general talk explains that the final assault on Kells Castle can now be prepared. This brings a smile to Maeve's face, and it's one of those smiles that only actors really do. No one in the real world has a smile that says, "I'm evil, and I'm pleased with the fact I'm evil." Most really evil people in the world have the kind of smiles that suggest they learned about smiling from a Reddit post. At this point, the Sentinels pop in to share in the general bonhomie, fresh off having bested the Mystic Knights in combat, and explain that they're going to destroy the Mystic Knights with their own weapons. The Mystic Knights having to learn to defeat their own magical weapons sounds like an awesome set piece that we will absolutely not get to see in this episode. It's quite odd how often this show will absent-mindedly tease something much better than the plot they end up going with. One of the Sentinels, I can't tell which one because it's pretty hard to tell which of them is actually speaking at any given time, sounds upsettingly like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in the sense that he sounds like someone loaded up a dishwasher with gravel and then set it running at 35% of usual power. There's a nice little moment where one of the Sentinels, the Rockwolf, throws some shade at General Torque and his military skills, and Torque responds in kind. I do like it when we see the forces of evil being depicted as basically hating each other because it rings very true. Most of Hitler's inner circle cordially despised one another, and you see a lot of the same energy in the far right today. People who share nothing but a set of repellent prejudices and a crippling addiction to power struggle to actually get along together, and it's quite pleasing to see that represented in a small way in this show. As a mildly off-topic aside, I think the Skeksis in the Dark Crystal remain one of the most powerful depictions of a genuinely evil civilization ever committed to screen. You get a sense of just how exhausting it is to live in a society without loyalty, where any alliance is only a matter of convenience and every interaction is a competition. It's a depressingly accurate portrayal of where the ethics of capitalism ultimately end up. A collection of all-powerful, half-mad priest-kings riven with intrigue and performative cruelty, where material excess winds up as a substitute for genuine joy. The jolly little scene with Torque and the Sentinels at each other's throats ends with Maeve showing off her magical powers by making a very small flame appear on the model of Kells Castle, to the delight of the assembled ne'er-do-wells, who are clearly the sort of people who'd be impressed by Paul Daniels. Meanwhile, the Mystic Knights are doing their best trudging across a field on their way to see King Finvara when Angus spots a glint of gold in a field and insists on running in to grab it, something that makes Deidre furious despite his insistence that it'll only take a moment. He hares off in pursuit of some shining coins that the other characters can't see. Also, the field is bordered by a series of small cairns. To no one's surprise, it turns out to be some sort of trap, and there's a flash of light and Angus is suddenly frozen in place, giving actor Vincent Walsh a chance to practice his standing very still acting. Guy's pretty good at it. Guy stands very still like a champion. Seeing Angus in trouble, Rohan, Ivar and Deidre have a cunning plan, which is to run straight into the field after him. Fortunately, Aideen the Fairy is on hand to point out that this is an idea so stupid it would be obvious to a toddler on fentanyl. She tells them that this is a pixie field, as evidenced by the conspicuous cairns, and that pixies like trapping greedy travellers for their own amusement. Only the magic of Finvara can unfreeze Angus, which makes the pixie prank less of a jolly jape and more condemning someone to a lingering death from dehydration, which is only funny to reform politicians and the criminally insane. Thankfully, Ivar has an actual cunning plan, which is to lasso Angus and drag him out of the pixie field. He chucks the lasso and manages to get it over Angus's neck, which raises the potential for throttling Angus instead of saving him. Thankfully, in the next shot, the rope has magically been moved around Angus's chest, and the knights are able to drag Angus back out of the boundary of the field. A big shout out to Vincent Walsh here for remaining as still as a statue, despite being pulled across a field in a manner that looks really very uncomfortable. They get Angus upright and Deidre tries to wake him up from his magical stupor by slapping him. She's definitely a woman for whom violence is the first resort. She proper clocks him as well. There's a gag where Ivar also tries a slap and Deidre tells him they've already tried that, and Ivar says, "I know," to the general amusement of all. But Justin Pierre's slap is so much more gentle, it mostly serves to highlight that Deidre is a barely controlled psychopath in a way I am beginning to very much enjoy. Neither slap works, so they have no choice but to carry Angus to the stone circle which leads to Tir na Nog. And by they, I mean exclusively Rohan and Ivar, toting cut purses being beneath the dignity of a princess of the realm. On arrival, King Finvara does agree to release Angus from the spell, but only after he's delivered an incredibly weak one-liner about Angus seeking golden opportunities to the performative hilarity of his court of simpering imbeciles. Vincent Walsh does a fantastic faceplant on being brought round. He's got his arms down by his sides. There's no protection at all, and it looks absolutely brutal. It's arguably the best actual stunt we've seen in the entire show. It made me wince. Rohan asks for King Finvara's help because they've lost their magical weapons and have yet to tame Pyre. This causes another outbreak of unearned hilarity from the assembled court and makes Finvara very angry. He's already given them some insane advice about turtles in the last episode and is furious that he's being asked for more help. He does tell them they can use the daggers on the belt of their armour to summon Pyre, but insists they must face the sentinels and Pyre as they are for reasons that are completely inscrutable. Then he dismisses the knights because he has many important things to do, which I assume is code for taking lots of drugs, because it certainly seems like he's currently in withdrawal from something and in a bad way. We now cut to the knights back at Kel's castle, and Rohan is busy explaining to Kahad that they've lost their weapons and haven't tamed Pyre, just in case any viewers had forgotten what happened literally 10 seconds ago. Kahad rather unhelpfully agrees that this is indeed a problem. He's been taking unhelpfulness lessons from King Vara, it seems, because he goes on to tell them it's for them to work out how to defeat the sentinels and tame Pyre before swanning off. On his way out, he decides to make the chair Angus is sitting on become very hot. If there's one thing this show loves, it's setting fire to Angus's bottom. I'm starting to think someone involved has a very, very specific fetish. It's up to the Mystic Knights to come up with a plan, which is a problem because they're very dim. There's a bit of workshopping which would bring a tear of frustration to the eye of even the most experienced corporate training facilitator, and then Aideen pipes up claiming to have a plan, only to be ignored even though she claims it's a really good plan. It's at this point in the episode that I start to feel like I'm going mad, because a big chunk of the last episode was people talking about how turtles are amazing at fighting and that's the key to victory, and this time no one has so much as mentioned Kelanoidea. Aideen flies off in a huff, and we immediately cut to the sentinels, who have their own cunning plan to defeat the Mystic Knights, which is to wander aimlessly around the countryside hoping that they bump into them. I'm starting to think the inhabitants of Pretend Island may have managed a remarkable feat of inventing leaded petrol before the combustion engine. When Aideen rocks up to say she's got hacked off with the Mystic Knights and offers to lead the sentinels to them, they are enormously pleased and see no reason whatsoever to doubt her sincerity. Aideen duly leads the sentinels to the Mystic Knights, who seem to be standing around in a field in a way that no one in the real world ever stands around in a field. One of the sentinels suggests working their way round to behind the Mystic Knights, but the Ice Lord slaps him down and demands they do a frontal charge on the defenceless foes. As you may already have worked out, the frontal charge leads them directly across the pixie field, leading to them becoming frozen in place just like Angus was. Aideen's apparent defection was a ruse, a desperately obvious ruse, but I do like that the pixie field from earlier gets to come back. I rather naively had assumed the whole business with the turtles would be foreshadowing how the Mystic Knights would be able to tame Pyre without access to their magic weapons, and then use Pyre to defeat the sentinels. Instead, No one has even mentioned a turtle, and they've got their magical weapons back via pixie shenanigans. I don't actually mind it as an outcome. It's nice to have a bit of silly nonsense with Angus come round as a cool strategy to outfox the sentinels later on. That's quite neat. Once Aideen has flown over to retrieve their weapons, the Mystic Knights are ready to try once again to tame Pyre. Heading into the cave, Ivar notices some human bones, which suggests that Pyre has literally killed and eaten someone in the recent past, which raises the stakes of trying to tame him quite nicely. It's time to put on their magical armour and head further into the cave in search of Pyre. Having found the dragon, it's then immediately time to get fire breathed all over them and run for cover. We now get a little reminder that the forces of Temra haven't politely stopped to let the Sentinels and the Mystic Knights settle their differences. It's a normal day in Kel's one and only village, and the locals are busy doing peasant stuff, which means on this occasion playing hurling. Now, if you haven't heard of it, hurling is a traditional Gaelic sport in which 2 teams of 15 compete to see who can do the most violence while pretending to move a ball about with a wooden paddle. These days helmets are mandatory, but even so injuries are common, and according to the Wikipedia page, hurling can boast having, quote, a notable proportion of blunt scrotal trauma. Though it is silent as to whether there is a similarly notable proportion of labial injuries in the women's game, which feels like a bit of a double standard. If the villagers are playing hurling, then the forthcoming attack by General Torque and his warriors probably comes as something of a relief. With the forces of Temra once more rampaging at will through the countryside, we cut back to the Mystic Knights, who are still being very gently roasted by Pyre. Rohan directs them to use their magic weapons, but there's a problem. The magic weapons don't work. Deidre realises that their weapons are still frozen from the pixie field, and I have to admit this is a clever twist. It makes sense, and it suddenly gets us back to the Mystic Knights having to tame the dragon without their weapons, which is where we left off at the end of the last episode. It's a strange and roundabout way to get to a place they'd already signposted, but hey, at least they got there. There's clearly one thing, and only one thing, that can save them now: turtles. I feel like a turtle without its shell, says Angus, which is a strange thing to say, given that it's his weapon and not his armour that's on the blink, and also his armour has repeatedly saved him from being roasted alive. A better thing would have been to say, I feel like a turtle without its machete. Nonetheless, this gives Rohan the opportunity to deploy his superpower of remembering things that happened very recently. Everyone realises the thing they need to do now is act like a turtle and allow Pyre to tire himself out by repeatedly trying to murder them. Finally, we've got to the point which was obvious from the beginning of the episode. Overall, actually, I quite like taking the meandering route where we get from A to B by taking in some more scenic letters of the alphabet on the way. It keeps things interesting, but at the same time it does make the Mystic Knights seem even dimmer than they were at the beginning of the story. Rohan tells the others to stay where they are. There's no point in them all risking their lives, which is something I can definitely get behind if there's even the faint chance of him being cooked alive in his armour. Then he goes out and stands in front of Pyre, who continues trying to set him on fire, something that has failed to work every single time he's tried it. Looks like the Mystic Knights aren't the only ones who are supernaturally dim in this story. Ivar, Angus and Deidre look on in horror, but crucially and relatably don't actually offer any help. Rohan yells in pain while the flames wash over him again and again. Ratcheting up the tension, we cut back to the village where a desperate rearguard action is now being fought by the warriors of Kells. Kudos to the fight coordinators in this one for managing to convey that things are going badly, despite the ongoing requirement that no one be actually hurt. It's reasonably clever to be able to visually give the impression of a battle lost with only pushing and shoving to work with. General Torque does a bit of gloating to really hammer home the peril, and comments that they don't have to worry about the Mystic Knights saving the day because of the sentinels. Which is our cue to check in on the sentinels who are still frozen in place in that pixie field. Maidar, the Dark Elf, pops up, looks thoroughly disappointed, and then uses his magic to free the sentinels from the pixie field and tells them to head off and seek revenge on the knights for their defeat. Even though he's only on screen for a few short seconds, Ned Dennehy still manages to deliver his trademark bizarre performance, and as always, it is the best thing in the episode. He's such a great character actor. Midar teleports the sentinels to the general vicinity of the knights, where they run into the victorious General Torque. After a little bluster between the villains, Angus, Deidre and Ivar show up, and General Torque's forces immediately take to their heels and run, which is a joyous moment of extreme cowardice. The knights and the sentinels square off, and Ivar wonders how they will be able to fight without their weapons. Deidre correctly points out that since the sentinels are unfrozen, their weapons must be unfrozen as well, which sets the scene for a titanic battle between the two groups of warriors. This battle opens in classic Mystic Knight style, with both sides standing motionless and firing laser beams at each other. I really do think the makers of this show overestimate the visual impact of people standing still and firing laser beams at each other. Fortunately, Deidre is far too angry to put up with standing still for long, and quickly decides that what she wants to do is kick someone awkwardly in the thigh. Having done this, everyone else decides to pile in as well, and we've got something approaching a melee developing. The knights are still outnumbered though, and the sentinels surround them, and things begin to look desperate for the heroes. It's at this point that two things happen. Rohan suddenly appears riding on the back of Pyre to chase off the sentinels, and I start throwing things at the TV. Taming the Dragon was supposed to be the entire focus of not one, but 2 episodes, and it winds up happening off-screen. How precisely did Rohan tame the dragon? Fuck you, that's how. It's the single most important plot point we've had since they got their mystic armour, and they can't even be bothered to show it to us. It is utterly infuriating. I was trying to work out how this baffling decision was made, and I can only assume that the writers couldn't come up with something that would work visually with a relatively limited CGI available, and decided that rather than have something disappointing, they'd leave it to their audience's imagination. It sort of worked in that I've come up with several different ways of staging it that I reckon could have been done with the technology at hand, and there's plenty of filler in this episode you could have cut in order to have a tense scene with a battered and weary Rohan trying to outlast the dragon's fury. It's a baffling decision, not least because it robs you of the chance to show Pyre developing a grudging respect for Rohan through their battle, and show the beginnings of some kind of genuine bond of affection between them. This sort of thing makes me furious. It's like cutting out the attack on the Death Star at the end of Star Wars. If there's budget issues, make cuts elsewhere. You don't need the scenes of the forces of Temra rampaging through a village, for example. That's just background colour. Use that time and cash to show the literal point of the whole story. Anyway, despite completely failing to stick the landing, the Mystic Knights are once again victorious with the help of Pyre, and now they have the ability to summon a dragon when they're in a sticky situation. We finish this episode with things arguably looking worse for the forces of Temra than they have for some time, despite Temra having won multiple battles over the last 2 episodes. Overall, I think there's some fun stuff in this pair of episodes, even though the lack of a proper resolution makes me utterly furious. I'm pleased to see that the writers are beginning to have some fun with Deidre being angry literally all the time, and there were some entertaining swerves in this episode in particular. I think the next episode is going to see the knights finally begin the quest for the warrior Draganta, and I think it's only once that's out of the way that we'll have established what will, I imagine, be the status quo for the series. 9 or 10 episodes to get to the baseline structure of your show is quite impressive, especially for a kids' show, and it's nice to see the setup being given quite so much space to breathe. It certainly makes it feel a lot less repetitive than Power Rangers. I hope you'll join me again for another unnecessarily detailed analysis of 20 minutes of television. In the meantime, if you want to support this kind of nonsense, and why wouldn't you, you can do so by going to patreon.com/HJDoom and pledging as little as £1 to keep this show on the air and ad-free. There's a whole bunch of stuff available for patrons to download. Check it out if you're interested. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so via email at hjdoomretrofun, all one word, @gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at HJDoom. This has been a presentation of Doom Industries. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.